Hello everyone, welcome to this tutorial on Compass Navigator Pro, which is a tool which you can use in Unity for either implementing compass, a minimap, or on-screen and off-screen indicators. Now, if you're not sure what these are, you'll see them in a bit. And once you've purchased Compass Navigator Pro and imported it, you'll find it under plugins, Kronnect, Compass Navigator, and everything is over here. You can read the documentation through the URLs here. So I have a very small setup here where there's a cube. It has a Playmaker FSM that just moves the cube left and right and front and back. So that's basically the logic, and it has a rotation as well, which I can just rotate using J and L keys so that we can demonstrate the features of Compass Navigator Pro easily. So you have this scene. I don't have any Compass Navigator component set up in the scene. So how do you add it? You can go to the Compass Navigator Pro folder, go to resources, CN Pro, prefabs, and you'll find a prefab called Compass Navigator Pro. And there's only one. You can just click and drag that into the scene. And once you do that, you can see that this game object, it'll basically be a canvas with all the components. This is the compass, this is the minimap, and we'll see what on-screen and off-screen indicators are in a moment. So if I expand Compass Pro, you can see that you can individually enable and disable these things. So if I'm doing a 2D game or 2.5D game, I won't be using these two features most probably. So I'll be having only the on-screen and off-screen indicators. So I can just disable these two and have only the indicators, and so on and so forth. Whatever you'd like, you can keep it and you can disable the rest. So once you do that, you can just scroll down, and if I go to compass bar settings over here, you can see that the style is set to Fantasy 3. And if I click on the question mark here, you can see that there is a sprite over here. And if I click on it, it'll open up the folder in which all of these themes are located, styles are located. So these are basically 9 slice styles. So these are basically sliced sprites that you can make if you want. So if I click on this and go to this open sprite editor, you can see that its borders are set so that if we expand the middle part, it will tile, and that's how we get this shape. So I'll just go back to that one, and here we can just change it to anything else, and you can see that if I set it to angled, it's using this sprite and it switches the theme, which is pretty cool. I'm gonna stick with angled, and I can increase the scale of the cardinal and ordinal points. Ordinal points are the ones which are like northeast and northwest. So once you do that, you can change the color of them as well. So these are the colors for the ticks that go in between. You can increase and decrease the number of ticks in between as well, and reduce their height according to your preference. Now we can also control the tint of that particular sprite you have. So if I change it to something darker, you can see that it has a different look now. If you look at this, you can also have edge fade out, which if I enable and increase the width, you can see that we can have this very smooth edge fading, which is really cool. You can control the overall opacity of the compass as well. And there are a few other settings that you can change, like the icon settings, the point of interest settings, title settings, and reveal text, which are basically specific to the point of interest. And we'll get to that in a moment. So I'll just collapse this one and expand the minimap settings. And you can see that there's the same kind of format where you can change the style, and I can just set it to something like a solid circle, and you can see there's a vignette effect that's going on. I can disable that. I can have the background color to be changed to something else, etc. You can also do something like a enemy or like alert kind of effect using this if you animate it using script or something, which is really cool. For now, I'll just disable vignette and reset this background color. Now you can see that the minimap is a little bit too close to the right side corner, so I'll just increase it to about 20 and 20 on the Y so that it has a little more room. I can enable and I can increase and decrease the size of it. I can have the alpha animated so that it shows up only in certain circumstances. You can change the tint, overall tint, by having this tint color for theming, etc. You can disable cardinals, which are these things. You can increase the size, etc. Now this one has a particular sprite which you can replace. You can remove the plus symbol in the middle and that will look a little bit different if you don't want that much information in the minimap. So I'll just disable it for now. And we'll obviously need the player icon. I'll just increase the size holding down Alt so that it has finer control. And you can see that we can customize the player as well. So I'll just add a blue-ish tint to that. You can also change the player icon here. Now I don't want any field of view cone. You can enable that here. And depending on your field of view, you can have points of interest that will be visible. So once we do that, we can go ahead and create a point of interest to see what exactly happens. So now it looks clean. And if I create a 3D cube, and let's say I want this to be something like the enemy, I'll just go create a quick material called the enemy and assign that to this one. And there we have our enemy. So let's say we need an indicator for this. I can just go to Add Component and Compass Navigator Pro and Compass POI. And immediately, as soon as you do that, you can see that if I move this around, it updates the distance as well as the icon in the compass, which is really cool. Now once we have this ready, you can just hit play and we'll just see what exactly happens. Now you can already see that show up in the minimap as well as the compass. Now you can see that as we hit play, the icon shows up in the on-screen part, and if I move away, you can see that it shows up, but it's too big. And you can see there's an issue with the compass where it shows up as a square. I'll explain why in a minute. If I go to Compass Navigator Pro and go to on-screen indicator settings, I'll reduce this by half, and in off-screen indicator settings, I'll just reduce this even more, like maybe 0.25, something like that. And now it looks a little bit better. Once you're happy with the result, you can just copy and paste the scales that you want. But before that, we'll see why this square is showing up. And if I go to compass bar settings and if I go to cube 1, which is this point of interest object, if I go to can be visited, that basically records whether you are close enough to the point of interest and it records it as visited. That is what is happening here. It got visited, but it doesn't have a particular sprite for you when you visit. So if I change it, now it shows up. You can disable can be visited completely and that will keep the icon the same. But if you need that to be different, you can do that as well. So I'll just quickly apply these changes coming out of play mode. Now you can also enable and disable distance text, which is this text that shows up in the compass, and the same goes for other settings as well. If you want the distance to show up in the on-screen indicator, you can have that on, but usually it does not make sense because you have that invisibility, so you can disable that. So you can disable that here and have the distance show up as soon as it goes out of the bounds. So that's how you create a point of interest to any game object. So I'll just quickly save the scene and have a final review of it. As soon as I go out of the screen, it shows up here, and you can see that it says show distance is disabled globally. So I'll go to the Compass Navigator Pro object and enable distance for the off-screen ones, and it shows up right away. Now there is an indicator prefab. So if I open this, you can see that there's a icon here. So if you don't want this particular prefab to be there, you can change that as well. You can come out of play mode, go to Compass Navigator Pro, and I'll just quickly enable distance for the off-screen text. And once we do that, you can click on this prefab. I'll just copy this prefab and go to the tutorials folder. I'll create a custom prefabs folder and paste it. Now I have this POI gizmo custom. I'll just quickly open it and you can see that shows up exactly the same. And if you don't want that, you can quickly design something like so. Let's say I wanted it to be a pointy triangle. I can do that as well. So right now it's a 256 by 256 sprite, and I'll make a square and use that as a reference and reduce the size for this one so that I can export the same size. I'll just do 256 and I'll use the same directory to export the arrow. Once I do that, I can just assign this particular arrow, and there we have a new prefab. Now you can change the font of this as well. So if I go to the distance and title, select both of them, I have two different fonts that I imported earlier. So I'll just use something like Cinzel, which is like a fantasy kind of font. So I'll just go back and we can use that particular prefab now. If I go to POI Gizmo and replace that with the custom one, I can just save the scene and hit play. And now if I go out of bounds, you can see that there's a brand new indicator. So I'll quickly come out of the game mode and go to Compass Navigator Pro and open this again. And I'll move this a little bit to the right. And I'll actually scale this a little bit down. So I'll just enable the proportional scaling and maybe put like 9 or 8 for that matter. And it should look a little bit different. I can just go back to the scene and hit play. Now you can see that it's slowly fading when I move closer. There's transparency, but it's not completely proper. And our arrow is looking much more better now with the gap between the icon and the arrow. We can go to the POI cube, and if I go to screen indicator settings, I can just increase it to, I can just increase the max visible distance to 20 and far field distance to about 15 maybe. Let's take a look. Now if you can see, if I move closer, it almost goes like completely transparent, but you can decrease it even more by having a value of like, let's say 6. Now it looks very smooth, and I can decrease the scale as well a little bit so that it looks better. And I'll increase. So you have two different settings. One is within the POI object and one is within the main component. So you can have global settings like here, like let's say on screen you want it to be like 0.4, and if you want this to be bigger, then you can change that there. So I'll just leave it at 0.25 and 0.4, and that for me seals the deal and it looks pretty good. So I'm gonna leave it at these values, and you can see them inside the minimap as well. So if I maximize it, you can see that there's a compass right around the same place. It's not completely visible because our player's icon is a little bit too big. So I'll make it like maybe something like 1.25 or 1.75, and that should look much more better. Now if I press J, I can rotate it, and you can see that it gets completely hidden, and when we reach that angle, it automatically shows up. So that's the basic functionality of Compass Navigator Pro. You can have the compass, you can have the minimap, and you can also have scan effects. Let's explore a little bit more on the minimap. So I'll just come out of play mode. Now some of the changes will not be saved, but that's fine. If I look at the minimap settings over here, You can disable it completely in this setting, visibility in Minimap, and it will disappear from the Minimap. And you can have it when in range, and you can increase and decrease the scale according to your liking. You can have something like show rotation, which we'll look at once we hit play. You can have something like a circle. If I increase this to about a 20 radius circle, you can see exactly what that is. You can change the border color, which is the external one, and the inner color, just make it probably black and have something like that. Or you can just completely disable this and have something like a shadow kind of effect with this. So that's pretty cool. Let's go back to the normal settings. Now you can override this particular icon with something else and it'll change the icon. So these are the minimap settings that you can change for any POI, and I'm gonna leave it at 20 and hit play. We'll look at what the rotation does. So if you look at it, there is something called repetitions here. That's the circle animations that we saw. If you don't want that, you can just disable that. And here you can see that the icon currently is like diagonal. If I rotate over here, you can see that it stays like that. So if I disable it, you can see that it has only one particular angle and it sticks with that, even if you rotate. If I enable that, you can see it's changing based on our rotation, and you can see that our geometry of the level is currently showing up in the minimap as well. So if I want my minimap to be a little bit more zoomed in, I can just go all the way to the minimap settings and have our captured world size a little bit reduced, so that you can see that when I move our cube, you can see even the cube move right in front of the arrow. So that's pretty cool. And we can change some of the geometry here and see the result in runtime. If I go back to the minimap settings, you can even have a layer mask, which if I disable a particular layer, it won't show up. And that way you can have a complete layer of the world and have that rendered on the minimap. Alright, so I think we covered most of the main features of Compass Navigator Pro. In the next video, we'll be covering something related to the scan effect. So I'll see you in the next one. If you liked this video, please subscribe and consider leaving a like. If you have any questions, please leave them below, and happy game development.